Thank you and good morning, everyone. I think you all know that I'm Sharon Whitehill, and again, I'm your worship associate today at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Charlotte County. I'd better slow down before I stumble anymore. My first order of business, though, is to say thank you to Tom and Corey for tech management, Mary Jane and Sandy in the office, Sandy in particular this week, to Janet and LP and Ryan, who keep the choir singing, to the decorators of the pulpit and the beautiful new display of art on the wall. Thank you all. Ushers and greeters and coffee makers in the kitchen. And if I've left anyone out, get after me after the service, because I tried to cover you all. I do thank everybody who contributes to keeping this fellowship in wonderful, healthy shape and beautiful shape for our Sunday gatherings and other events. So, not least of all, welcome to all of you in the congregation and those of you watching at home on YouTube. Welcome to our progressive, lay-led community at UUFCC, where we gather to learn more about being human. We haven't figured out all of life's problems or answered all of life's questions, but we come here to learn to listen, to forgive, to be vulnerable, to practice compassion. Some of us bring our best selves on Sunday mornings. Some of us bring our struggling selves. Whatever your age or your ability, your economic status, your education, your skin color, your sexual orientation, your gender identity, or any of those struggles I mentioned, whatever, you are welcome here, whatever self you bring. If you're new or otherwise curious, you can email Mary Jane at the office. Is there anybody here today for the first time that we can say hello to? Yes? No? No? Okay. All right, I won't go into launch into my little spiel about that, but what about snowbirds coming or going away? Anyone in that category? Okay. Thank you. Well, at this point now, Ryan will give us the prelude, and I believe it's, yes?
Turn off your phone.
I'm supposed to tell you to silence your cell phones, please? You'd think I'd never done this before. Yes, please silence your cell phones, and I will remind you at the end of the service to turn them back on. So, thank you. Now, Ryan will play Mendelssohn for us. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Excuse me. The chalice lighting words today are in recognition of Kenny in Dennis's sermon, as you'll hear, and in all the other children, including and especially those at the borders of various countries, any children who need support. With the lighting of the candle flame today, I offer these words by Tracy Bleakney. A child journeys far from home, fearful and brave, in need of safe harbor. May we send out our comfort to them like a candle flickering in a window of darkness, and welcome them into our hearts with its warmth, nourishment, and love. And now, as Sandy lights the chalice, and those of you at home may wish to light one also, please join me in reciting our affirmation. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our aspiration, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another. Thank you, Sandy. Let's join together in singing hymn number 1053 in the Teal hymnal, How Could Anyone Ever Tell You You Were Anything Less Than Beautiful? The opening words today are from Geraldine Renton. She's a blogger from Ireland who raised a Hunter syndrome son until his death at 18. Her words are in two parts, and here's the first part. I am exhausted. I am a weightlifter. I am a nurse. I am a specialist. I am a doctor. I am a teacher. I am an advocate. I am a mediator. I am a specialist, a secretary, an occupational therapist, a speech and language therapist, a physiotherapist. I'm a cook, not a great one. I'm a children's entertainer. I'm a cleaner. I'm a clown when I need to be. I am an encourager. I am a holder of secrets. I am a bottomless pit of information about children's rights. Yet I am insulted regularly by what title is given to people like me. I am looked down upon due to being just a carer. So, what do you do for a living? People say. And next, to balance these very real truths, this outpouring also by the same author, the same mother, and it's dedicated to others like herself. As a carer, you are now in a secret world. You'll see things you never imagined. Ignorance, rudeness, and discrimination, but you'll also witness so many everyday miracles, and you'll know it. You won't think a milestone is just a milestone. You'll know it's a miracle. You'll treasure things most wouldn't think twice about. You'll be an advocate, an educator, a specialist, and a therapist, but most of all, you'll be a parent to the most wonderful child. Our tradition here at UUFCC is to share our joys and our sorrows, our life milestones, by entering them into the Red Book, which Susie is going to bring up for me in a moment. And you can enter anything you have to say in this Red Book on Sunday morning when you come in, or you can email your joys or sorrows or milestones to bookoflife@uufcc.org, and the worship associate, in this case I, will read them and enter them, read them from the pulpit and then enter them into the book on Sunday. All right. June 2nd, we have an entry from Alan L. Last Thursday after UU meditation, I took home a foster puppy. Monday, it found an adopted home. I feel heartbroken. I hope to adopt a dog. I hope you can too, Alan. This is from Dennis. I am so happy that Mary Jane is healing and will be able to return to the office soon. And also, I'm so grateful to Sandy now that she's returned from her vacation, her adventures, and she is covering the office each weekday morning. He notes that there is also a replacement wheelchair for church use, which Susie saw to it that we got hold of. So thank you, Susie, for that. A third entry is from Patrick. PFLAG chapter of Port Charlotte wants to thank UUFCC for their support. Join us for cake after the service. It's a beautiful cake out there, dedicated to us. So thank you for that, Patrick. We hold these milestones, spoken or unspoken, in our hearts and minds, assuring you who have experienced them our love and support, even if they remain unspoken and held within you. For a brief period of meditation now, I invite you to consider these three statements from three famous people. First two are blind. The third suffered from polio as a child, and I think their names you will recognize. The first is Marlee Matlin, who is not sighted. I take it back. She's hearing challenged. She says, "Silence is the last thing in the world you will ever hear from me." Stevie Wonder, just because a man lacks the use of his eyes doesn't mean he lacks vision. And from cellist Itzhak Perlman, ask many of us who are disabled what we would like in life, and you would be surprised how few would say, not to be disabled. We accept our limitations. So with these thoughts in mind, let's have a brief moment of silence. please stand now in body or spirit for hymn number 95 in the gray hymnal? There is more love somewhere. Number 95. We begin our monthly theme today, which is disabilities, and with us to speak is our own Dennis Shaw, who needs no introduction, but I wanted to make one anyway.
Can get a little crowded under there. I've entitled this presentation, Kenny's First Trip to Lollies. It's basically based on the beliefs, our three principles, that the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. After watching just a half an hour of the evening news, it is easy to conclude that our and other countries are filled with injustice, oppression, violence, and hate. And to that awareness that our greed has created a huge carbon footprint that is responsible for global warming. These realities can and often do leave one with a sense of despair. However, I've come to believe that despair, while it may be grounded in reality, is counterproductive. Instead, I've come to believe that by making an accounting of those areas in our society and institutions that are improving, we are empowering and motivating. This is especially true if one is invested in the area under consideration. So I've decided that this morning I will concentrate on an area which there has been major positive changes which I helped bring about. This is the day I choose to celebrate the accomplishments made in the American public schools over the last 50 years, and specifically in the area of special education. I have a keen interest and appreciation of those accomplishments because I spent the majority of my years on the front lines of a societal and educational revolution that was ignited by the 1954 Supreme Court decision that made it illegal for schools to segregate based on race. I'm calling this celebration of special education Interdependence Day because without the interactions, the interdependence of millions of people, these exciting, life-changing events would not have occurred. It is almost unfathomable to me to consider the conditions that children with significant developmental challenges experienced when I entered the field in 1975. At that time, there were at least 8 million children in the United States with significant developmental problems. Of this total, less than half were getting what was considered at that time an adequate education. Of the others that were involved, 2.5 million were receiving practically no education, and another almost 2 million were simply not in school. Now, my first experience with a peer with a significant developmental disability occurred in Sunday school in the mid-1950s. I will tell Kenny's story to honor his memory and to illustrate his plight. Kenny had Down syndrome. He was labeled mongoloid. Mongoloid was a derogatory term based on the form of his eyelids. Today, Kenny would be diagnosed as having Down syndrome. It's a genetic disorder caused when abnormal cell division results in an extra full or partial copy of chromosome 21. This extra genetic material causes a long but consistent list of developmental changes and abnormal physical features. In addition, children with Down syndrome also grow slowly, remain shorter than children of the same age. Their cognitive functioning ranges from mild to severe levels of disability, and they frequently have delays in language development, poor short and long-term memory functioning, and other disabilities. When Kenny and I attended the same public school, we had no contact there at all. His classroom was in the old building's basement, next to the janitor's room and the boiler. And what went on down there, nobody had any idea. During Sunday school, he accompanied the lady that picked up our offerings, delivered the Kool-Aid and cookies, and took roll. At our small Presbyterian church, there was a scheduled half-an-hour break between Sunday school and the start of the worship service. This break gave the ladies in the choir time to slip out of their dresses and into their zippered black nylon robes, which were adorned with golden stoles. And then they could warm up their voices and share gossip. The men would gather under the East Side fire escape and smoke cigarettes. School-age children, with implied permission, would escape down the half block towards the river to buy candy at Lolly's Convenience. Lolly's building predated the Civil War, which was evidenced by its sagging clapboard structure. Apparently, the tradition of taking a Lolly's break was also quite old. During one of his multiple unsuccessful attempts to quit smoking, my father, the Sunday school superintendent, spent his lolly break viewing the neighborhood from the top step of the church's street front entrance. From this perspective, he had a full view of the small churchyard. It had a wall that was elevated the small grassed areas, and there were concrete stairs that led down to the sidewalk. Sitting on the second step from the bottom sat Kenny. He was sobbing. My father sat down on the fourth step from the bottom, spread his arms, and invited Kenny to sit next to him. While Dad held him, Kenny cried, tears of rejection, loneliness, oppression. He told my father that he was a retard. The following Sunday morning, my father and our minister held a meeting prior to the beginning of our religious education classes. All school-age children were expected to attend. This gathering focused on the mistreatment and the rejection of Kenny. Within a few moments, it was made perfectly clear to all assembled that Jesus expected us to treat Kenny as a friend. The word retard was officially declared profane, and its use was subject to punishment. Furthermore, the minister strongly suggested that in addition to asking Jesus for forgiveness, that we should apologize to Kenny for isolating and rejecting him. The next Sunday, and for many Sundays thereafter, my brother Bobby, friends Karen and Katrina, and I walked with Kenny to Lolly's. Kenny was so very, very happy. Improving special education became a national education priority in 1965 when Lyndon Johnson signed the Elementary Education Act as part of the War on Poverty. Then, following a decade of significant litigation, Gerald Ford signed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, or Public Law 94-142. This law required equal access to education for children with disabilities. Additional public laws extended the age span for services from birth to 21 years, included students with traumatic brain damage and autism. Additionally, the laws required that each student's individual education plan must include a transition plan focusing on post-school life. Excuse me, 1 second. In 1992, I published my dissertation. It was entitled From Paradigm to Kmart, an alternative approach to teaching students with severe mental retardation. This event significantly expanded my job description and my role as a special educator. In a cooperative effort between Guilford County Schools and NC A&T State University, I started teaching graduate courses 2 evenings a week that focused on the challenges and needs of children with severe communication disorders, including autism. Course requirements included student teaching experience in my model classroom in a regular elementary school. Additionally, the North Carolina Department of Education provided funds so I could travel to other school systems in the state and teach others about this curriculum. I did postdoctoral work through Chapel Hill's TEACH program. TEACH is an acronym that stands for the Treatment and Education of Autism Communication Handicapped Children. There, I was taught the latest research and methods for teaching students with autism spectrum disorder. Thanks to an Apple grant, I even got to spend a summer in Lithuania teaching Lithuanian teachers about autism. Now, before I go any further, for my own peace of mind, I must apologize if my words sound boastful. I am proud of what I accomplished during my career, but I am deeply aware that all of it grew out of deep relationships with so many wonderful people: parents, children, educators, administrators, scholars, therapists, graduate students, teacher assistants, shop owners, policemen, librarians, bus drivers, volunteers, and a lot of kind-hearted strangers. My work was created within the context of a citywide community while I was in the delightful company of my special students and teacher assistants. I was blessed. During my tenure in special education, segregation of special needs students in school basements, separate schools, or institutions significantly declined. The new laws introduced so many children to more normalized, inclusionary environments. Gradually, across the nation, these children were attending neighborhood schools and being integrated into community-based work and recreation programs. However, while the reality of inclusion was an essential step to decrease the oppression of folks with significant developmental challenges, more radical changes were required. The most significant of these changes became very apparent when I was studying for my doctoral degree. This core realization was that we needed to rethink our basic paradigm, the paradigm under which we operated. A paradigm can be defined as a typical pattern of something, an umbrella over a worldview with its underlying theories, models, and methodologies. Comparing the old paradigm, which grounded my teaching, to the new paradigm I was attempting to adopt would require much more time than has been allotted me this morning. But a brief summary is required. 20th century American education is broadly based on a paradigm anchored in classical Newtonian science and the Industrial Revolution. Since the majority of special education programs are direct outgrowths of conventional education models, special students were included under the existing paradigm. The efforts that increased inclusion of special children strengthened these ties. Basic characteristics of the old paradigm include competition, individualization, and independence. An alternative to this classical view, this paradigm that's based in classical science, is a paradigm that came from the scientific revolution. It's best represented by the work of Albert Einstein. This new paradigm is based on the belief that what is learned is significantly related to the nature of the learner. In other words, what the person perceives is, to a great extent, depends on what his or her projections are. What the individual learns changes both the world and the individual, because the realities of the external and internal realms are unified. Even object, time, space, and causality are orienting concepts to whom and where an individual is. I discovered through studying the work of Matthew Fox, a radical American theologian, a much clearer way to illustrate the old and new paradigms. In his book, and this title is wonderful, in his book, a spirituality named compassion and the healing of the global village, Humpty Dumpty and us. Fox states that the old paradigm is compatible with the metaphor of Jacob's ladder, found in the 28th chapter of Genesis. In chapter 28, God promises 100-year-old Jacob that he and his wife Sarah will parent a nation that will cover the world and span the ages. Most of you are probably aware of the African-American spiritual "We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder." The song is in our gray hymnal. It's on page 211. Fox asserts that this metaphorical ladder is by nature isolating, competitive, patriarchal, hierarchical, elitist, fragmented, and alienating. On the other hand, the metaphor of Sarah's dancing circle, which was inspired by the 18th chapter of Genesis, in which Jacob's wife Sarah discovers that at age 90 she will bear a child. Fox proposes that this metaphor of a dancing circle is compassionate, nurturing, inclusive, creative, independent, interactive, transformational, flexible, and cooperative. Using the same melody as climbing Jacob's ladder, the words for "We Are Dancing Sarah's Circle," which we will sing in just a few minutes, were penned by Carol A. Etzler in 1975. My dissertation was based on 3 years of loving interactions with 5 young adolescents, 2 girls and 3 boys. These children were all diagnosed with severe mental retardation and communication disorders and autism. I committed to teach them under Sarah's paradigm. Like the previous teachers, I stressed the development of positive social interactions and the elimination of injurious behaviors. We also focused on self-help skills. I continued to spend a great deal of my time creating schedules and plans and routines and teaching materials. But despite all these familiar activities, my commitment to creating an educational experience for my students under the new paradigm remained an unrealized challenge. So, armed with new inspiration, a team of extraordinary university advisors and mentors, federal and state laws, a generous budget, and extremely caring and motivated assistants, parents, and school administrators, I joined the special education revolution with passion. The first act of my rebellion was to expand my classroom into the larger neighborhood. I committed to teaching my students vocabularies that would be useful in their homes with their families. So we visited each student's home. These ranged from 5,000 square foot McMansions to single wide trailers. And during these visits, I photographed every room, cars, pets, possessions, and of course, every family member. The film was quickly developed, and then with some assistance, each student created a photo-based story, a narrative that he or she could share with others. With the addition of my very simple printed text, the photographs were reproduced and placed in each student's story notebook. The original photos were then entered into a small blue album and given to the student who owned the precious story. The photo-based narratives were so successful that I decided that I would expand my teaching beyond the classroom walls. So my students, staff, and I began exploring the neighborhoods surrounding the school. A grocery and drugstore were located within several blocks. We often went there to get supplies for making delicious snacks and picking up our developed film. But it soon became apparent that we had outgrown our neighborhood and that we would have to master riding on the Greensboro Transit Authority buses. It never ceases to amaze me how quickly some skills can be learned if the results lead to expanding one's freedom. We made regular trips to the new Greensboro Public Library, to the Carolina Circle Mall. We ate at the lunch counter where the famous civil rights sit-ins occurred. We saw plays, movies. We even attended the circus. With the help of the maintenance folks at a large county park, we learned to fish. We even returned a lost traffic cone, which we discovered in a park creek, to the Highway Department storage barn. There we got to ride in the buckets that are used to change the street and traffic lights. Those folks at the maintenance department made sure that our experience would become one of the most memorable parties and stories. By the end of the third year, my students had created over 30 photograph-based stories of their adventures in their homes and town. My students' parents were delighted with the stories and reported that their children were becoming much more communicative and demanding and interactive. Everyone wanted opportunities to create daily narratives. So I began photocopying our daily photo-based schedules, and then I'd add on the back 10 questions. Students could answer these questions by pointing to the correct photo or signing, or in many cases, even attempting to speak. The return homework gave me the means to maintain a daily evaluation of each student's progress. By the end of the school year, each child had expanded their verbal vocabularies to include hundreds of words. These were spoken in simple but clearly understandable terms. One of the girls in my classroom, I will call her Dora, lived with her mother in a small cottage on the east side of town. Earlier in the year, when we visited her home and mother, the mutual love bond between them radiated. It was a shock to all of us when Dora's mother died a year later. Over the following months, my grieving student moved into a small group home. Gradually, she adjusted to her new family and thrived. After I transferred to a new school to create another model classroom, I stayed in contact with all my previous students and attended their graduation from high school ceremonies. As I witnessed Dora dressed in her cap and gown, proudly process down the auditorium aisle, I noticed that she was carrying a small blue photo album. It was the story of our visit to her home to meet her mother. I wept. But during those 3 wonderful years, my students made significant growth. But I also changed in very important ways. I experienced the power of storytelling and realized that when given the choice, I will always prefer dancing in circles as opposed to climbing up and down a ladder. Blessed be.
Dennis, will you announce the hymn, please, so I can stay down?
Yes. And now, if you will stand in body or spirit, and we will sing Dancing Sarah's Circle, page 212 in the gray hymnal.
This reminds me of the time I gave a sermon in a fellowship out in Arizona, and I hadn't numbered my pages, and I had given the same sermon before and had not put them back in the correct order. And there I was, and I would turn the page, and it was completely wrong. What do? I took my pages and I went and sat on the steps and I sorted through them. I believe it's time for the offering now, if I have the right page. So unless you're with us for the first time, and there's no need to give since you'll be our guest today, please, the rest of you, be generous as the baskets come along. You know that our mutual support is what keeps this fellowship up and running and as wonderful as it is. So if the ushers will please come forward. It's time now for our announcements, or otherwise known as Life of the Community, news and weekly activities that are also posted on the website at uufcc.org, so you can always check there if you have any concerns or questions about what's coming up. As you know, Mary Jane's still off, although and so her updates are on hold, except we actually had a lovely one this last week from Sandy. So thank you, Sandy. It's really nice. Thank you. If there's an emergency, you can always contact our board chair, Dennis Shaw, and that would be at shawdennis@icloud.com. And speaking of contacting Dennis, he has a note for me here that his home internet is down. Xfinity promises it will be back in service by late tomorrow. He apologizes. If you need to reach him, don't text or write. Just call him on the phone because his phone still works. So another just a note here to remind you that no membership meetings will be taking place this summer. The next one will be in September, and we've seen that note several times on our website, so just a reminder of that. And lastly, we're trying to put together, the Worship Associates are, a panel of speakers on coping with differences in families where there are disabilities, both the afflicted person and the families thereof. So, see Lori if you have any ideas, would like to be on this panel, have some suggestions about what it might include. She and we would be very glad to hear your ideas. Yes, closing words. I think you will like these closing words. They are from a man whose name is familiar to you, Fred Rogers. Taken from his book, The World According to Mr. Rogers. Yes, that Mr. Rogers. he writes, part of the problem with the word disabilities is that it immediately suggests an inability to see or hear or walk or do other things that many of us take for granted. Well, what of people who can't feel or talk about their feelings or manage their feelings in constructive ways? What of people who aren't able to form close relationships, strong relationships, and people who cannot find fulfillment in their lives, or those who have lost hope, or who live in disappointment and bitterness and find in life no joy or no love? These, he says, these, it seems to me, are the real disabilities. Please join me now in our ritual words as Sandy comes up and extinguishes the chalice. This is my cue to remind you to turn your phones back on. And please join me in these words printed in your order of service. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of hope, the fire of commitment, or the warmth of community. May those ideals shine in our lives and warm our hearts until we are together again. Go now in peace. If you please stand in body or spirit for 1039 in the teal hymnal, Be Thou With Us.